Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the key tactical theme that helped Tuchel's Chelsea expose Arsenal's backline. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Arsenal's pressing and their overall shape out of possession. Then we'll look to Chelsea's attacking structure. And then we'll finish off with how they were able to create overload specifically on the right-hand side to cause the Arsenal backline problems and ultimately win the game. So when we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Chelsea in a 3-4-2-1, and you end up seeing Arsenal starting the game in a 4-2-3-1. So first we'll focus on Arsenal's shape out of possession, and what we ended up seeing was that they were looking to press higher up the pitch in the earlier stages. They were looking to close down with their front four, so ultimately that means that Pepe, Martinelli, and Saka are closing down the center backs, and in that midfield zone, rather than having Xhaka and Lukaku pushing forward to help out Smith Rowe, they had Smith Rowe closing down the deepest Chelsea midfielder depending on the side of the ball. So if the ball was shifted out to Chelsea's left-hand side, you would see Smith Rowe stepping towards Kovacic, and if the ball was shifted out to their right-hand side, Smith Rowe would close down Jorginho. Obviously, that does leave a spare Chelsea midfielder for a passing outlet, but what ended up happening was that if Smith Rowe shifted towards Kovacic, then Saka would shift across to close down Jorginho, as Azpilicueta isn't a threat in that position. If the ball was shifted out to the opposite flank and you had Azpilicueta on the ball, Saka would close him down. You'd have Smith Rowe shifting across to close down Jorginho, and then Pepe would shift across to close down Kovacic. You do see Cedric and Tierney stepping forward to close down the wing backs. And then you have 4v3 with Xhaka and Lukaku helping out the center backs with Lukaku, Mount, and Havertz. The reason why Arteta didn't want Lukaku and Xhaka to push forward was because now they could win the spare balls in that midfield zone if loose passes were played, but it was mostly down to the movement of Havertz and Mount. What you ended up seeing was that they were looking to drop off deeper to overload that midfield zone and to present themselves as the spare man to bypass the Arsenal press. And if they dropped off deeper, you would need Havertz to be closed down by Lukaku, and then Xhaka would step towards Mason Mount, and that still allows Arsenal to have a 2v1 against Lukaku. Ultimately, this is what Arteta wanted in his midfield zone. If Havertz drops off deeper to pick up the ball, you see Lukaku shifting across to close him down, and then Xhaka's in the half space monitoring the movement of Mount, who is dropping off into the midfield zone. This is another example of Arsenal pressing well on the left-hand side, with Saka shifting across to close down Azpilicueta, Smith Rowe sticking with Jorginho, and Xhaka prepared to close down Mason Mount, who's dropping off into his own half. What should also be said was that if Pepe or Saka couldn't shift across to help out Smith Rowe with the spare midfielder, Arsenal could simply have Martinelli dropping off deeper to help out and close down Jorginho or Kovacic. When Arsenal dropped off deeper and they weren't pressing, they were more of a 4-5-1. And what you ended up seeing was that Smith Rowe would drop off into that midfield zone to help protect the center of the pitch, because there were times where Xhaka was dropping off into that half space to ensure that Mason Mount couldn't get on the ball. It also ensured that it wouldn't be a 2v1 initially. This is an example of what Arsenal's left side should look like. When you have Mason Mount dropping off deeper, you could see Xhaka in the half space in between Marty and Tierney, and that's where you end up having Saka also a bit deeper, so it does create more of a 3v2 on that side, but you also have Smith Rowe dropping off into that midfield zone. Here you can see an example of Arsenal having a 2v1 against Mount, with Xhaka making a challenge in that midfield zone to win possession, but focus on the opposite side of the pitch. Lukanga's in a deep central midfield zone, but he doesn't need to pick up Havertz because Havertz is pushed higher up the pitch and Holding could step to him, but he's also shifting laterally to monitor the movement of Lukaku to ensure that the Chelsea striker isn't 1v1 with Marty to break into that channel. And in that 4-5-1 that at times became a 5-4-1, you'd have Martinelli dropping off into that midfield zone to close down Kovacic or Jorginho if they were on the ball. Ultimately, this was a logical approach as well, because if you have Martinelli and Smith Rowe dealing with Kovacic and Jorginho, Xhaka's dealing with Mount when he drops off into that half space, and then you have Havertz dealing with Holding for the most part. But if Havertz wants to drop off a bit deeper, then Havertz would be closed down by Lukaku, who was the spare man in that central zone. It leaves Holding and Marty with Lukaku. And then out in those wider areas, if Rudiger or Azpilicueta were pushing forward, Saka and Pepe could close them down. Ultimately, now we have to focus to how Chelsea were looking to attack. And similar to their previous game, they were looking to push the wingbacks higher up the pitch, and that being Alonso and James. And they effectively become more of a 3-2-5. The issues that they can pose here is that they're looking to get the wingbacks to run in behind Cedric and Tierney. And then you have Havertz and Mount who have the ability to drop off into that midfield zone to overload those areas. That's why Xhaka's movement into that half space was so important, and why it was also integral that they had markers on Kovacic and Jorginho so that Lokonga could help out with Havertz if he dropped off holding. The evident improvement in Chelsea's attack was based around Lukaku dropping off and backing into Mari, and it gave Chelsea an outlet to play positive passes into him, whether it be Kovacic or Jorginho, the two attacking midfielders behind him, and there are even times where you saw the backline fizzing balls into Lukaku. Ultimately, on paper, while Arsenal's approach without the ball should have been successful, there were two clear issues that led to their downfall. One was the movement of Mason Mount, and what we ended up seeing was that Mount was looking to shift laterally to drag away Tierney, and that's where you would see Reece James bombing forward down that right channel and behind. When Mount was dropping off deeper, Xhaka was picking him up, but what ended up happening was that when Mount was looking to stay higher up the pitch, he was able to drag Tierney into that central zone, and even if he does do that, if James is pushing forward beyond Saka, who at times was focused on Azpilicueta a bit higher up the pitch, then you need Xhaka to drop in to close down James, or simply have Xhaka dropping off into the half space as he was often in that zone, and have Tierney shift across to deal with the Chelsea right wing back. However, what ended up happening was that there were times where Xhaka was caught central as Lukaku dropped off deeper to back into Marty, and when he got sucked into that zone, that allowed Mount to make that run across Tierney, and that's where they were able to get the overload. In the build-up to Chelsea's opener, you witnessed Kovacic picking up the ball near the halfway line as Arsenal are in their 4-5-1, and he's looking to drag the ball across Martinelli to step into that midfield zone. At this moment, focus on the positioning of Xhaka and Saka. As that play develops, you end up seeing Kovacic playing a first-time ball into the path of Lukaku, who's backed into the path of Marty, but focus on Mason Mount's movement. He's looking to make a run across Tierney to drag him central, and that's where you can see Reece James at the top of the screen making a forward run down that right channel, and that's where you do need Xhaka to shift across to close him down, or he should be picking up Mason Mount so that Tierney can shift out to that wide zone. However, when Lukaku receives the ball, look at how much attention he drags towards him. You have Marty and Lokonga shifting across, Smith Rowe tracking back, but the issue that Arsenal encounter here is that with Mount dragging Tierney into a central position and Saka not tracking back for Xhaka, if Xhaka does step into that zone where Lukaku has the ball, Arsenal have to win it because Reece James is continuing to push forward, and at this moment he should be shifting out into that wider area to stop Reece James from running into space. But what happens there is that Lukaku is able to drop the ball off into the path of Kovacic, and now look at all the Arsenal players taken out of the game and the space that Reece James is able to run into, and all it takes is a simple dink over the top into right half space from the Croatian, and it places Reece James in this position to receive the ball, and now focus on Lukaku making a run in between Marty and Tierney to break towards goal. What also benefited Chelsea here was that Lukaku was able to brush aside Marty, and it creates a simple passing avenue for James to slide the ball across Tierney for Lukaku tap-in. And then when you look at Chelsea's second goal, it should have easily been prevented as you have Lokonga and Cedric closing down Havertz near the touchline, and they should be winning the ball or at the very worst causing a foul. And what you end up seeing is Alonso making a run off Smith Rowe, and that should be tracked, but given the fact that it is 2v1, he gambles. Havertz does a very good job of sliding the ball across Cedric and Lokonga, and it presents Alonso in this position ahead of Holding stepping across, but look at the opposite side of the pitch. Xhaka's looking to recover his position. You have Lukaku looking to make a run across Mari towards the box. And then you see 2v1 once again as Mount and James are pushing ahead of Tierney. Alonso opts to square the ball into the path of Lukaku. And Xhaka takes a gamble of making a 50-50 sliding challenge to attempt to win the ball. But from that position, he has to win possession because if it ends up falling into Lukaku or Mount, you have 2v1 down that right-hand side. Unfortunately for Arsenal, the ball falls into the path of Mount's feet, and that's where you end up seeing James continuing his run into right half space, and Tierney was dragged central, so that allows Mount to slide the ball in towards his right wing back's path. And when James receives the ball in this position, he ends up putting Chelsea up 2-0. The other issue that Arsenal encountered is that when Arsenal were pressing higher up the pitch, Kovacic and Jorginho began to drop off deeper into their own half to pick up the ball away from pressure. And at times where they didn't see Smith Rowe or the wider players closing down Kovacic or Jorginho, we did witness occasions where Lokonga and Xhaka were stepping towards those Chelsea midfielders, at times with the wider players as well. And that created avenues for Chelsea to bypass the press to break swiftly. And that's where they're able to also create overloads in those wider areas to exploit the Arsenal backline. This is an example of poor Arsenal pressing, as you have Martinelli ahead of Christensen, no one stepping towards Azpilicueta, as you end up seeing Smith Rowe and Xhaka being pulled towards Jorginho. And that creates a gap for Kovacic to receive the ball, as Nicolas Pepe isn't shifting laterally to close him down. The reason why that's a big issue for Arsenal is that when Kovacic receives the ball, you could see Xhaka looking to recover his position, but look at that midfield zone. Both Havertz and Mount drop off into that area to create an overload between Lokonga, and that helps Chelsea push forward. If we look to an example, here you can see Rudiger on the ball, and once again it's Pepe and Lokonga getting caught out of position, but Lokonga in particular pushing towards Kovacic, dropping off towards the edge of his own box. This allows Rudiger to slide the ball across Pepe, and once again, what you end up seeing is Havertz dropping off into his own half to pick up the ball to overload that midfield zone. When Havertz picks up the ball, he carries it towards half, and you could see Lokonga tracking back, attempting to win possession, but Havertz ends up locating James, pushing forward down that right channel, and you can see Xhaka not tracking the movement of Mason Mount as he's looking to push forward to possibly stop the pass, but it creates a 2v1 as Tierney is dragged central by Mount's movement. That ultimately results in James receiving the ball in right half space and dragging away Tierney. And from this position, you could see Lukaku making a run towards goal, or James could play the ball back to Mount, who's making an unmarked run towards the Arsenal penalty area. However, this time, rather than playing that ball through the 6-yard box, he looks to play it back into the path of Mount, but from that position, Mari ends up blocking his first-time effort. And if we look to one final example, this time you have Cedric stepping towards Alonso, but focus on Lokonga's position. He's stepping in towards Chelsea's half to squeeze and close down Kovacic, but once again, it's Havertz dropping off into his own half to create the overload to receive the ball. Havertz ends up receiving the ball and running into Arsenal's half, and that's where you can see Lukaku just ahead of Mari, Holding looking to step forward to attempt to close him down, and you could see Mount making a run across Xhaka to run into the space in behind Holding and Mari, and that presents Mount in a position where he ends up dragging both Cedric and Mari to the ball, and he has Lukaku and Havertz making runs off Xhaka and Lokonga. But from that position, while Mount delivers a quality ball into the box, Chelsea failed to increase their lead. So as you could see, while Lukaku's dominance on Mari may steal headlines, Arsenal's inability to cope with their individual assignments in the midfield zone resulted in Chelsea creating overloads on the right side of the pitch to effectively win the game in the opening 45 minutes.